All right, so I cut my teeth at 18 years old. The way I paid my way through college was I started knocking on doors. So I sold door to door. I was chased out of neighborhoods by rabid dogs, had doors slammed in my face. So I learned quite a lot about resiliency and persistence during that phase. And then at around 21 and a half, I actually started 2 more companies at the same time, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And started essentially as the first salesperson in this company. Went from being the first salesperson to bootstrapping it up to 50 salespeople and about $25 million in revenue. But then I exited out of that company, and over the last 9 months have helped to scale 13 companies here in Silicon Valley. So I guess that's all to say, like, that I've been there, I've done that, but I think here in Silicon Valley, sometimes there's this kind of myth that in some ways, like, certain people have the answers and they have it figured out, and I can tell you from my own experience that this was like one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life, and it wasn't pretty, and it wasn't smooth. Like, there was a lot of despair, there was a ton of frustration. I went through 4 VPs of sales. I had my company almost go bankrupt at least 4 times. And I was on the verge of giving up many times. So anything that I share with you today is just in the hopes that you don't make all the same mistakes that I did along the way. So I think it's helpful to get a little bit of context. As we're kind of heads down building a startup and working, grinding it out, I think it's kind of helpful to understand, like, where are you in the cycle, and what I've started to see is patterns at each one of these phases. So I wanted to just share this with you first. So if you kind of look at the stages that a startup goes through, in the beginning, you're incubating an idea. Is there a there, right? Kind of just shaping, doing customer discovery, potentially getting out a super buggy MVP. And then kind of you move from that first phase of kind of discovery into what I would call kind of the validation phase or the accelerate phase. And that's really about kind of getting your first 10 or 20 customers. And I think that there's been a lot of content and kind of process and materials around kind of how to do that. And when I looked at the ecosystem and kind of like looked at my own company's growth and also started to kind of look at 10, 20 companies a week, what I saw was there was this stage which people were, I guess, either didn't understand or didn't acknowledge. So I would talk to 10, 20 companies a week that had hit validation and thought because they had hit validation, they were ready to push the scale button. And in fact, like, that's one of the biggest mistakes that startups make is scaling prematurely and burning cash and running out of time. So I think when I think about like one of the biggest phases where companies typically fail, it's kind of in between this validation and scale phase. So what I wanted to talk to you about today was like the 7 patterns that I've seen through building my own companies and then also helping to scale a bunch of other Silicon Valley startups. So let's kick it off here. So the 7 deadly sins. So sin number 1, boiling the ocean. I'll share a little bit of a story. My last company, we got to about $2 million in ARR within about 2 years or so. So it was relatively quick. But then we just kind of stalled out at around $2 million. And what was happening is we were essentially covering about 15 markets throughout the US. We were covering 7 verticals, so we're pretty wide to get to $2 million. And the business just couldn't seem to kind of bust through that ceiling. And so what we did was we actually kind of sat down and we looked at all the customers and we did like a win-loss analysis, which right now seems really simple, but essentially what we did was we looked at all the customers, all the verticals, all the areas, how much they had spent, where they came from, and what all the attributes of those customers were. And what we found is that although we were covering 14 markets and 7 different verticals, what we found was that there was these 2 verticals that were actually producing over 50% of the revenue. So what we did is we kind of asked ourselves the question, like, why are we in these 14 markets?